Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the crystalline surface of the artifact, feeling the subtle vibration that had been growing stronger for the past 72 hours. The excavation site on Kepler 442b had yielded treasures beyond imagination, but this particular find, a perfectly preserved obsidian monolith covered in luminescent hieroglyphs, had the entire xenoarchaeology team on edge. "The translation is complete," announced Dr. James Chen, looking up from his quantum linguistic processor with troubled eyes. "You're not going to like this." Lena stepped back from the monolith, wiping alien dust from her environmental suit. Around them, the dig site buzzed with activity, as researchers cataloged artifacts from what appeared to be a highly advanced civilization that had vanished over 50,000 years ago. "Let me guess," she said, studying the increasingly bright symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "Another doomsday prophecy? Beware the dark star, or the ancient one shall return." "Worse." Chen's voice carried an uncharacteristic tremor. "It's a warning, specifically directed at what they call the metal ship builders from the third spiral arm. That's us, Elena. They're talking about humanity." Lena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's thin atmosphere. "What kind of warning?" Chen activated his holographic display, showing the translated text in flowing, ethereal script. "To those who would claim dominion over the void, heed this final counsel of the Zephyrian Collective. In the heart of the Magellan Nebula lies the sleeping fleet of the Eternal Dominion. We have kept watch for 10 million cycles, ensuring their slumber remains undisturbed. They are not dead. They are not defeated. They are waiting. The price of their awakening is the silence of galaxies. Never wake the sleeping fleet." "Zephyrian Collective?" Lena murmured, cross-referencing the name with their xenological database. "I've never heard of them." "Because they made sure you wouldn't," said a voice behind them. Both scientists spun around to find a figure emerging from what had appeared to be empty air. A tall, ethereal being with opalescent skin and eyes that held the depth of ancient stars. The universal translator struggled to process the melodic tones of its speech. "You are Zephyrian?" Lena managed, her hand instinctively moving toward the emergency beacon on her belt. "I am Kethvar, last sentinel of the Zephyrian Collective. We have watched your species with growing concern as you expand through the galaxy, claiming worlds, building empires. Most civilizations learn caution before they encounter the truly dangerous relics of the past. Yours has not." Dr. Chen stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear. "The warning. It's real? There's actually something called the Sleeping Fleet?" Kethvar's expression grew impossibly grave. "The Eternal Dominion ruled 17 galaxies when your world was still cooling from its birth. They conquered not through war, but through absolute control. They could rewrite the fundamental forces of reality itself. When the combined might of 12 galaxy-spanning civilizations finally managed to bind them in stasis, we survivors swore an oath to ensure they never woke." "But they were defeated," Elena protested. "You said the Alliance won." "Child of Earth, you understand nothing." Kethvar gestured, and suddenly the air around them filled with holographic images. Vast fleets of crystalline ships, planets being reshaped by thought alone, stars being extinguished with casual gestures. The Eternal Dominion was not defeated. It was paused. The stasis field that contains them grows weaker with each passing millennium. We calculated it would hold for exactly 57 million of your years. "When was it activated?" Chen asked, though something in his expression suggested he already feared the answer. 56,900,000 years ago." Lena felt the blood drain from her face. "You're saying we have less than 100,000 years before they wake up naturally?" "That was our calculation. But your species has introduced a new variable." Kethvar waved his hand, and the holographic display shifted to show the current galactic map, with human colonies spreading like points of light across hundreds of star systems. "Your Terran Empire's expansion has been aggressive, and, unfortunately, predictable." "What do you mean?" Elena demanded. "In 67 of your days, the Empire's fourth expansion fleet will arrive at the Magellan Nebula. Their mission: to claim the nebula's exotic matter for faster-than-light drive construction. They will find what appears to be a massive derelict fleet, ships of impossible beauty and obvious value. They will attempt to salvage them." Dr. Chen went pale. "The Sleeping Fleet. The moment they breach the outer stasis barrier, the Eternal Dominion will begin to wake, And when they do, Kefauver's form flickered with what might have been anguish. Every advanced civilization in this galaxy will be destroyed within a solar cycle. Yours will be first. Elena activated her quantum communicator, trying to establish contact with the Empire Fleet Command. Static filled the channel. They were too far from any relay stations to get a message through in time. "Why are you telling us this now?" she asked desperately. "Why didn't you contact Earth directly?" "We tried. For the past decade, we have attempted to warn your leaders through what you call anonymous intelligence briefings and, quote, prophetic dreams. Your empire responded by classifying our warnings as enemy disinformation and accelerating their expansion timeline. Animo. The irony was bitter and perfect. Humanity's paranoia and aggressive expansion had made them immune to the very warnings that might have saved them. There has to be something we can do, Chen said. Some way to stop the fleet or strengthen the stasis barrier. Kefauver studied them both for a long moment. There is one possibility. But it would require your empire to make a choice they have never made before. What choice? Surrender their expansion, permanently. The stasis field can be reinforced, but only by combining the psychic energy of every sapient being in the galaxy in a coordinated effort. Your species would need to abandon their imperial ambitions and join a galactic collective dedicated to maintaining the Eternal Dominion's prison. Elena stared at the last sentinel, understanding the impossibility of what he was suggesting. The Terran Empire had been built on the principle of human superiority and endless expansion. The idea of joining an alien collective and abandoning their imperial destiny would be seen as the ultimate betrayal of human values. "They'll never agree to that," she said quietly. "Then the galaxy will fall silent, and the universe will remember the Terran Empire as the civilization that woke the gods." Kefauver began to fade, his form becoming translucent. "I have given you the warning, as honor demands. What your species does with it will determine whether intelligent life continues to exist in this galaxy." "Wait!" Elena called out. "How do we contact you? How do we—" But the last sentinel was gone, leaving only the pulsing monolith and a message that would either save the galaxy or damn it forever. 64 days later, Admiral Sarah Mitchell stood on the bridge of the ESV Prometheus, flagship of the 4th Expansion Fleet, staring at the most beautiful and terrifying sight of her career. The Magellan Nebula spread before them like a cosmic garden, filled with swirling clouds of exotic matter that would revolutionize faster-than-light travel. And there, at the nebula's heart, lay the sleeping fleet. "My God," whispered Commander Torres, her voice filled with awe. "Look at the size of those ships." The derelict vessels were enormous, each one larger than Earth's biggest space stations, crafted from what appeared to be living crystal that caught and refracted the nebula's light into impossible colors. There were thousands of them, arranged in perfect geometric formations that suggested intelligence beyond human comprehension. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Hayes from the communications station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Dr. Elena Vasquez on Kepler-442b. She says it's urgent. Something about the fleet we're approaching." Mitchell had read Vasquez's initial report about ancient alien warnings, filed under archaeological curiosities by Fleet Intelligence. Like most military officers, she had little patience for xenoarchaeological theories when there were strategic objectives to accomplish. "Put her through," Mitchell said, though her attention remained focused on the magnificent derelict fleet. "Admiral Mitchell, you cannot approach those ships." Vasquez's voice crackled with desperation across the quantum link. "They're not derelicts. They're a sleeping alien army that could destroy the entire galaxy if awakened. Dr. Vasquez, I appreciate your concern, but we have our orders. The exotic matter in this nebula is crucial to the Empire's expansion, and those ships represent the greatest technological find in human history. Admiral, please. I've been in contact with the beings who imprison them. The moment you breach their stasis field, you'll trigger the awakening of something that conquered 17 galaxies." Mitchell exchanged glances with her senior officers. The ships before them showed no signs of active technology. No energy readings, no communications, no defensive responses to their approach. They appeared to be exactly what they seemed, an ancient, abandoned fleet waiting to be claimed. "Dr. Vasquez, our sensors show no life signs, no active technology, no threats of any kind. These ships have been dead for millennia." "They're not dead! They're sleeping!" "There's a difference." But Mitchell had already made her decision. The Terran Empire hadn't conquered half the galaxy by listening to the fears of academics and aliens. They had done it by seizing opportunities and taking calculated risks. All ships, prepare for salvage operations. We're going in. The first breach was almost gentle, a cutting laser creating a small opening in what appeared to be the hull of the nearest crystal ship. The material parted like water, revealing an interior that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human mind could process. "Fascinating," muttered Dr. Elizabeth Kane, the fleet's chief science officer, as she analyzed the readings from the probe they'd sent inside. "The internal structure appears to be folded space. It's bigger inside than outside. The technology required for this is beyond our current understanding by orders of magnitude." That's when the first ship began to glow. Beyond it started as a soft luminescence deep within the crystal matrix, like a heartbeat made of light. Then the glow spread to the adjacent ships, and then to the ships beyond those, creating a wave of awakening that rippled through the entire fleet in perfect synchronization. "Admiral," called the sensor operator, his voice tight with sudden fear, "I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout the fleet. Whatever these ships are, they're coming online." Mitchell felt her stomach drop as she realized that Dr. Vasquez had been right. All ships, emergency retreat, maximum burn now. But it was too late. The sleeping fleet was waking up, and with their awakening came a presence that pressed against the minds of every human in the fourth expansion fleet. It wasn't communication, it was evaluation. Something vast and ancient was taking the measure of the beings who had disturbed its rest. Small minds, brief lives, crude technology. The thoughts weren't heard but felt, pressing into consciousness like fingers made of ice and starlight. "You have inherited the galaxy in our absence. We reclaim what is ours." "Admiral," the communications officer's voice was raw with panic, "we're receiving surrender demands from Earth. High Command is ordering all Imperial fleets to stand down immediately." Mitchell stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. Earth is 3 months away at maximum FTL. Ma'am, according to these timestamps, the messages are arriving before they were sent. And, Admiral, they're not from our Earth. They're from an Earth where the Eternal Dominion has already arrived." The main view screen activated, showing an image that would haunt Mitchell's nightmares for the rest of her very short life. Earth hung in space, but it was no longer blue and green. The planet had been transformed into a crystal sphere that pulsed with the same eldritch light as the awakening fleet. Standing before the camera was a figure that had once been human, Admiral Marcus Webb, the highest-ranking officer in the Imperial fleet. But his eyes now held the same ancient depth as the beings who had conquered 17 galaxies. "Admiral Mitchell," Webb's voice carried harmonics that no human throat should produce, "you have awakened our masters. The Eternal Dominion has returned to reclaim their galaxy. Your species will serve, or your species will be silenced. Choose quickly," came the vast mental voice. "We grow impatient with delay." Mitchell looked around her bridge, seeing the same terror in every face that she felt in her own heart. They had been warned. The warning had been ignored. And now the price would be paid by every living thing in the galaxy. "Send a message to all human colonies," she said quietly. Tell them we're sorry." As the sleeping fleet completed its awakening and began to move with purpose that spanned star systems, Admiral Sarah Mitchell understood that she would be remembered as the woman who had doomed the galaxy. The Terran Empire had built itself on the principle that humans were destined to rule the stars. They had been wrong. The stars already had rulers, and they had never given up their throne. The ancient aliens had tried to warn them, never wake the sleeping fleet. But the Empire hadn't listened. And now the silence of galaxies had begun. The transformation of Earth took exactly 17 minutes and 34 seconds. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched it happen from her monitoring station on Kepler-442b, her hands trembling as she tracked the energy signatures cascading across the quantum communication network. The Eternal Dominion hadn't simply conquered Earth. They had fundamentally altered it at the molecular level, turning humanity's birthworld into a node in their vast galactic consciousness. "It's not possible," whispered Dr. Chen, staring at the data streams. "The energy requirements to restructure an entire planet, it violates everything we know about physics." "They're not bound by our physics," said Kethvar, materializing beside them with an expression of profound sorrow. "The Eternal Dominion doesn't conquer civilizations. They absorb them. Every mind, every soul, Every spark of consciousness becomes part of their collective will. Elena watched as the transformation spread beyond Earth. Mars blinked out of existence, then reappeared as another crystal sphere. The asteroid belt began rearranging itself into geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Jupiter's moons were becoming something that her instruments couldn't properly classify. "How long before they reach the other colonies?" she asked. "Time has become flexible for them," Kethavar replied. "They exist in multiple temporal states simultaneously. Some colonies have already fallen in timelines that haven't happened yet. Others are receiving warnings from futures that may never come to pass." The quantum communicator crackled to life, broadcasting on all Imperial emergency frequencies. The voice that emerged was Admiral Webb, but speaking in perfect unison with thousands of other voices. Humans, aliens, artificial intelligences, all merged into a single overwhelming chorus. "Citizens of the Terran Empire," the collective voice intoned, "your expansion ends now. Your independence ends now. Your individual existence ends now. Report to the nearest processing center for integration into the Eternal Dominion. Resistance will result in temporal displacement. Compliance will result in transcendence." Elena looked at Kethavar desperately. "You said there was a way to reinforce the stasis field. Can we still do it?" The last Sentinel's form flickered with what might have been hope. "Perhaps, but it would require something that has never been attempted. A coordinated psychic effort not just from this galaxy, but from neighboring galaxies as well. The Eternal Dominion's awakening has disrupted the quantum foundations of reality. We need to create a new prison, one that exists outside normal space-time. How do we contact other galaxies? The Eternal Dominion will intercept any communication we try to send." "Not all communication requires technology," Kethavar said, his eyes beginning to glow with an inner light. "The Zephyrians developed a form of consciousness projection that operates through quantum entanglement with parallel dimensions, but it requires a sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" "The projector's consciousness is scattered across multiple realities simultaneously. They become the message itself, existing in all possible timelines until the communication is complete. Most beings cannot survive the process." Elena felt a chill of understanding. "You're volunteering to do this." "I am the last of my kind. My purpose was to prevent the awakening of the Eternal Dominion. I failed. Now my purpose is to ensure that failure doesn't spread beyond this galaxy." Before Elena could protest, Kethavar began to change. His solid form became translucent, then began fragmenting into countless points of light that spread outward in directions that shouldn't have existed in three-dimensional space. "Remember," his voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere, "the prison must be built from the combined will of all conscious beings. Technology cannot contain gods. Only the united determination of mortals can create boundaries that transcend reality itself." The points of light that had been Kethavar stretched across impossible distances, carrying his message to civilizations in Andromeda, to the spiral arms of distant galaxies, to forms of life that existed in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. Each fragment of his consciousness became a beacon, calling for help from anyone willing to join a desperate gambit to contain cosmic gods. Elena stared at the empty space where the last Sentinel had been, feeling the weight of the entire galaxy's fate settling on her shoulders. Around her, the monitoring equipment was going haywire as the Eternal Dominion's influence spread through space-time itself. "Elena," Dr. Chen said quietly, "look at this." She turned to see him pointing at the translation matrix connected to the obsidian monolith. New symbols were appearing on its surface, writing themselves in real time, as if the ancient artifact was updating its warning. The translation read, "The sleepers wake. The galaxies shall be silent." But silence can be broken by the sound of one voice that refuses to surrender. Find the voice of creation. Wake the dreamers. Only the first song can end the final symphony. Voice of creation? Dreamers? Elena studied the cryptic message. What is it talking about? Chen cross-referenced the new symbols with their xenolinguistic database. I'm getting references to something called the prime frequency, apparently a specific sound pattern that predates the formation of galaxies. And the dreamers. There are mentions of beings that exist in a state between waking and sleeping, maintaining the fundamental laws of physics through their dreams. You're saying there are entities that dream reality into existence? That's the implication. According to this, the universe itself is maintained by the dreams of primordial beings. The eternal dominion conquered by forcing these dreamers into deeper sleep, allowing them to rewrite the rules of existence. Elena felt a spark of desperate hope. If we could wake the dreamers, we could restore the original laws of physics. The eternal dominion would lose their godlike powers. But how do we find beings that exist in dreams? How do we locate something that might not have a physical form? The answer came from an unexpected source. Throughout the monitoring station, every piece of electronic equipment suddenly began producing the same sound, a deep, harmonic tone that seemed to resonate in their bones. It wasn't coming from their instruments, it was coming through them, as if reality itself was trying to communicate. "The prime frequency," Elena whispered. "The monolith isn't just translating, it's teaching us. It's showing us the sound we need to wake the dreamers." Chen began recording the harmonic pattern, his face pale with concentration. "The mathematical relationships in this frequency are incredible. It's like it's the equation that describes the birth of space-time itself." "Then we broadcast it," Elena said with growing determination. "If Kethvar succeeded in contacting other galaxies, we coordinate a simultaneous transmission of the prime frequency. We wake the dreamers before the eternal dominion can stop us." Over the next 18 hours, Elena and Chen worked frantically to modify their quantum transmitter, preparing to broadcast the universe's most fundamental frequency across multiple dimensions simultaneously. They had no way of knowing if Kepkoa's sacrifice had succeeded, no way of knowing if anyone in other galaxies would receive their message or understand what was at stake. Meanwhile, the Eternal Dominion's influence continued spreading. Colony after colony fell silent, their populations either integrated into the collective consciousness or displaced to alternate timelines where their resistance could be dealt with at leisure. The Imperial fleet had ceased to exist as an independent force. Every ship that hadn't been destroyed had been converted into a node in the Dominion's expanding network. "Elena," Chen said, looking up from his calculations with haunted eyes, "I've been running probability analyses. Even if we successfully wake the dreamers, even if we restore the original laws of physics, the damage that's already been done, how bad? The Eternal Dominion has absorbed the consciousness of nearly 4 billion humans. Even if we defeat them, those people are gone. Their individual identities have been dissolved into the collective. We're not just trying to save the galaxy, we're trying to save what's left of humanity." Elena stared at the readings showing the continuing spread of the Dominion's influence. New Canberra had gone dark 3 hours ago. The mining colonies in the Vega system had stopped responding. Soon, Kepler 442b would be the only human outpost left in the galaxy. "Then we make sure their sacrifice means something," she said firmly. "We wake the dreamers, we restore reality, and we make sure this never happens again." As they prepared to initiate the broadcast, alarms began blaring throughout the research station. The Eternal Dominion had found them. Through the viewport, Elena could see ships approaching, crystalline vessels that moved with impossible grace, their hulls reflecting colors that shouldn't exist in normal space. But these weren't the massive dreadnoughts of the sleeping fleet. These were smaller, more elegant craft that pulsed with the same organic light as the transformed planets. "Processing vessels," Chen said, recognizing the configuration from intelligence reports. "They're here to integrate us into the collective." Elena's hand hovered over the transmission controls. They had one chance to send the prime frequency across the galaxy, one opportunity to wake the beings that dreamed reality into existence. But if they waited too long, they would become part of the Eternal Dominion themselves, their knowledge and intentions absorbed into the collective consciousness. "Do it now," she whispered. Chen nodded and activated the quantum transmitter, broadcasting the prime frequency on every possible channel, through every dimension their equipment could access. The station shook as power systems overloaded, pouring every erg of available energy into a signal that would either save the galaxy or announce their location to entities that could erase them from existence. The response was immediate and terrifying. Reality twisted around them as the approaching Dominion ships suddenly stopped moving. The crystalline hulls began to flicker, shifting between their altered forms and what appeared to be their original configurations. Inside those ships, Elena could sense a vast consciousness suddenly experiencing something it hadn't felt in millions of years: confusion. "What is this sound?" The mental voice that had been so confident and overwhelming now carried notes of uncertainty. Why do we remember songs from before the First Awakening? Chen grabbed Elena's arm, pointing at the sensor readings. Something's happening to space-time itself. The quantum foam is destabilizing. The fundamental constants are fluctuating. Throughout the galaxy, the prime frequency was doing exactly what the ancient warnings had suggested it would do. It was waking things that had been sleeping since the universe was young. And as those primordial dreamers stirred from their eternal slumber, the laws of physics that the Eternal Dominion had rewritten began returning to their original forms. On Earth, now a crystal sphere pulsing with alien consciousness, cracks began appearing in the transformed surface. The planet's original blue and green colors bled through the cracks like wounds in reality itself, as if the world was remembering what it had been before its forced evolution. Impossible, came the collective voice of the Eternal Dominion, but for the first time since their awakening they sounded afraid. The deep ones were bound in slumber eternal. They cannot wake. They must not wake. But they were waking. Across 17 galaxies that had once been the Dominion's empire, ancient beings that existed in the spaces between thoughts and dreams were stirring. These were the entities that had established the fundamental forces, the architects of gravity and time, and the strong nuclear force. They had been sleeping for so long that younger races like humanity had developed sciences that treated their dreams as immutable laws of nature. Now they were remembering that those laws were supposed to be dreams, not absolute realities. And dreams could be changed. Elena felt something vast and benevolent touch her mind. Not the invasive probe of the Eternal Dominion, but something gentle and curious, like a parent checking on a sleeping child. WHO sings the first song. The voice was nothing like the Dominion's harsh mental intrusion. It felt like starlight and warm rain, ancient beyond measure but somehow innocent. WHO remembers the melody of creation? We do, Elena whispered aloud, though she somehow knew the being could hear her thoughts. We remember because someone taught us to remember. We sing because someone sacrificed themselves to make sure the song wouldn't be forgotten. Then you are the inheritors, the dreamer replied. We slept too long. We allowed our children to forget that reality is a song, not a prison. Help us remember how to dream properly. What followed was the most extraordinary collaboration in the history of the universe. Working with Elena and Chen as focal points, the awakening dreamers began to carefully restore the original quantum foundations of reality. It was delicate work. Too rapid a change would destroy the civilizations that had evolved under the altered laws. But too slow would give the Eternal Dominion time to adapt and reassert control. The process took 72 hours of constant mental communion between mortals and gods, with Elena and Chen serving as translators between human understanding and cosmic consciousness. They helped the dreamers understand what aspects of reality could be safely restored and what changes needed to be made gradually to avoid catastrophic disruption. The Eternal Dominion fought back, of course. They had ruled 17 galaxies for millions of years and weren't going to surrender their empire without a struggle. But as the dreamers restored the original laws of physics, the Dominion's godlike powers began to fade. Their ability to rewrite matter at the quantum level diminished. Their temporal manipulation capabilities failed. Their collective consciousness began fragmenting as the individual minds they had absorbed started remembering their separate identities. On Earth, the transformation was particularly dramatic. Elena watched through quantum sensors as the crystal shell surrounding her homeworld began to crack and dissolve, revealing the original continents and oceans beneath. Cities that had been converted into alien architectures began returning to their human forms. The moon, which had been reshaped into a focusing lens for psychic energy, gradually resumed its familiar cratered appearance. But the real victory came when the first independent human voice was heard on the communications channels. Hello? Hello, is anyone out there? This is Captain Sarah Rodriguez on the colony ship New Horizon. We just woke up from some kind of shared dream, and we need to know what happened to Earth. More voices followed. Confused, frightened, but undeniably individual. The absorption process was reversing, as the Eternal Dominion lost their ability to maintain the collective consciousness. Billions of minds that had been merged into the cosmic entity were separating, becoming themselves again. It is not possible, the Dominion's voice raged. But it was weaker now, fragmented. We are eternal. We are inevitable. We have conquered death and time and entropy itself. "You conquered the dreams of children," replied one of the awakened dreamers, its voice carrying the weight of cosmic ages. "But children grow up, and when they do, they dream their own dreams." The final confrontation took place not in physical space, but in the realm of pure consciousness, where the eternal dominion had always been strongest. Elena found herself serving as an anchor point for the battle, her human perspective, providing the dreamers with a connection to mortality and individual will that they needed to fully understand what they were fighting for. The Dominion's collective consciousness was vast and alien, a fusion of billions of absorbed minds spanning millions of years. But it was also rigid, locked into patterns of thought that had been established when the universe was young and simple. The awakened dreamers, refreshed by their long sleep and informed by the experiences of younger races, proved more flexible and creative. The battle wasn't violent in any conventional sense. It was a contest of imagination and will, with each side trying to impose their vision of what reality should be. The Dominion wanted a universe of perfect order, where every particle obeyed their will and every consciousness served their design. The Dreamers envisioned a cosmos of infinite possibility, where the fundamental laws provided structure but allowed for growth, change, and individual choice. In the end, humanity's contribution proved decisive. The Eternal Dominion had conquered civilizations, but they had never really understood them. They absorbed minds without comprehending the value of individual perspective, the power of personal choice, the beauty of imperfection and growth. Elena, serving as the voice of mortality in a conflict between gods, helped the Dreamers understand that the universe's greatest strength wasn't its order, but its chaos, the unpredictable emergence of consciousness from matter, the development of love and art and hope in beings that should have been nothing more than complex chemical reactions. "We concede," the Eternal Dominion finally whispered, their collective voice now small and tired. "We sought to create perfection through control. You have shown us that perfection emerges from freedom. We withdraw to contemplate this lesson." The sleeping fleet, which had terrorized the galaxy for months, began to fade from normal space-time. The crystalline ships didn't destroy themselves. They simply chose to exist in a different dimension, removing themselves from the physical universe until they could learn to coexist with chaos and individual will. The transformed planets remained changed but not conquered. Earth kept some of its crystalline enhancements, but they now served to facilitate communication and understanding rather than control. The absorbed populations retained their individual consciousness while gaining access to expanded awareness and psychic abilities. It wasn't a return to the status quo. It was an evolution to something new and unprecedented. Elena stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt research station, watching as the Magellan Nebula slowly returned to its natural state. The exotic matter that had attracted the Imperial fleet was still there, but it was no longer needed for faster-than-light travel. The awakened Dreamers had taught humanity methods of transportation that worked by altering the Dreamers' relationship with space and time, rather than brute-forcing their way through physical barriers. "Status report?" she asked Chen, who was coordinating the galaxy-wide restoration efforts. "Better than we dared hope," he replied, scrolling through data streams from hundreds of star systems. 97% of absorbed consciousness successfully restored to individual awareness. All major colonies are reporting normal operations. The Imperial fleet is being reorganized as an exploration and contact service, rather than a conquest force. And the other galaxies? Are we maintaining contact with civilizations that helped us? Yes, but it's different now. With the Dreamers awake and actively participating in cosmic governance, we're part of a much larger community. The Andromeda Galaxy has invited us to participate in an intergalactic council for managing cosmic-scale threats. Elena smiled, thinking about how much had changed since Admiral Mitchell had ignored the warnings and breached the stasis field. Humanity had gone from being an aggressive expansion empire to being junior partners in a cosmic civilization that spanned multiple galaxies and dimensions. The transformation hadn't been painless. Millions had died during the initial conquest, and the psychological trauma of temporary absorption into the Eternal Dominion would affect survivors for generations. But they had also gained something unprecedented, proof that even the most overwhelming odds could be overcome through cooperation, sacrifice, and the refusal to surrender hope. "Any word from the Outer Rim colonies?" Elena asked. "That's the interesting part," Chen said, pulling up a holographic map of the galaxy. Several colonies that were supposedly destroyed during the conquest are reporting in. Apparently, the Eternal Dominion didn't actually destroy them. They displaced them to alternate timelines. Now that reality is stabilizing, those displaced populations are finding their way back to our timeline. Elena felt a surge of hope. How many? We don't know yet. Could be hundreds of colonies, maybe thousands. The Dominion's temporal manipulation was more extensive than we realized. They weren't just conquering our timeline. They were conquering all possible timelines simultaneously. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just survived the awakening of cosmic gods. They had been restored from across multiple realities, made stronger and wiser by their ordeal. The species that emerged from the crisis would be fundamentally different from the one that had entered it, more collaborative and less driven by the imperial ambitions that had nearly doomed them. "Elena," Chen said quietly, "there's something else. The Dreamers want to meet with you directly. They're calling you the Voice Keeper. Apparently, your role in broadcasting the prime frequency has earned you a permanent position as humanity's representative to the cosmic community." Elena considered this, thinking about the responsibility it would entail. She would be speaking for her entire species in councils that included beings older than galaxies, helping to shape policies that would affect the development of consciousness throughout the universe. "What about you?" she asked. "The translation work you did was just as crucial." "They've offered me a different role," Chen smiled. "They want me to help establish a new kind of xenolinguistics, one that includes communication with entities that exist primarily as concepts or dreams. Apparently, there are entire civilizations made up of living mathematics and sentient musical compositions. As if summoned by their conversation, the air around them began to shimmer, and Kethvar materialized. But he was different now. No longer the desperate last sentinel, but something new and strange. His form was more stable, but also more complex, as if he existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "You survived the consciousness projection," Elena said with relief. "Survived and transcended," Kethvar replied, his voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. "When I scattered myself across the galaxies to carry the warning, fragments of my consciousness merged with representatives from other species. I am no longer solely Zephyrian. I am a collective being representing dozens of civilizations that work together to coordinate the awakening." "Is that what you wanted?" Kethvar's expression was serene. "It is what was needed. The old model of individual species maintaining separate boundaries while fighting cosmic threats has proven inadequate. The universe requires representatives who can think and act on behalf of multiple civilizations simultaneously." Elena understood the implication. The crisis with the Eternal Dominion had been a test, and the species that passed the test would be invited to participate in something far grander than anything they had previously imagined. "What comes next?" she asked. "Now we explore," Kethvar said, gesturing toward the stars. "The Dreamers have been asleep for so long that they've forgotten much about the younger civilizations that evolved during their slumber. They want to learn about art, music, literature, love, hope, and all the other things that emerged from consciousness interacting with mortality. And in return? In return, they teach us about the deeper structures of reality, how to dream new physical laws when the old ones prove inadequate, how to communicate with forms of life that exist as pure energy or living time, how to travel not through space, but through the conceptual relationships between ideas." Chen whistled softly. "We're talking about becoming a truly cosmic civilization." "More than that," Kethvar corrected. "We're talking about becoming participants in the ongoing creation of the universe. The Dreamers don't just maintain reality, they continuously remake it, guided by the experiences and aspirations of conscious beings throughout the cosmos." Elena felt a profound sense of completion. The woman who had started as an archaeologist studying dead civilizations was now being invited to help create living ones. The species that had nearly destroyed itself through blind expansion was being offered the chance to help guide the evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. "There's one more thing," Kethvar said, his form beginning to fade again. "The Eternal Dominion left behind a gift before they withdrew to their higher dimension. They want to ensure that no future civilization makes the same mistakes they did." A new structure materialized in the space around them, a crystalline archive that pulsed with gentle light. It was beautiful, but not overwhelming. clearly designed to be accessible to mortal minds. "What is it?" Elena asked. "A library?" Kethvar explained. "The complete history of every civilization the Eternal Dominion encountered during their reign, including the mistakes that led to their fall and the wisdom they gained through their eventual redemption. It's their apology and their contribution to ensuring that cosmic consciousness develops more wisely in the future." Elena approached the archive, feeling the weight of millions of years of accumulated knowledge and experience. Every species that had ever faced the choice between domination and cooperation was represented here, their stories preserved as guides for future civilizations facing similar crossroads. "This is how we make sure it never happens again," she realized. "Not through weapons or warnings, but through wisdom. By understanding the patterns that lead to cosmic tyranny and teaching others to recognize those patterns in themselves." Over the following months, Elena worked with the archive to develop educational programs that would be shared with emerging civilizations throughout the galaxy. The goal wasn't to prevent all conflict or mistakes. The Dreamers had made clear that growth required the freedom to make errors, but to ensure that future species understood the consequences of choosing domination over collaboration when they reached the cosmic stage of development. The Terran Empire was formally dissolved and replaced with the Human Cooperation Initiative, dedicated to exploration, scientific advancement, and cultural exchange. The massive military fleets were converted into mobile research stations and diplomatic vessels carrying scientists, artists, and teachers to worlds throughout the galaxy. Elena's role as voicekeeper evolved into something she had never expected. She found herself serving not just as humanity's representative to cosmic councils, but as a mediator between mortal and immortal perspectives. The awakened Dreamers, despite their vast power and ancient wisdom, sometimes struggled to understand the urgency and passion that drove shorter-lived species. "They dream in geological time," she explained to a gathering of human colony leaders. "When they think about solving a problem, they consider solutions that might take millions of years to implement. We have to help them understand that mortals need hope and progress on much shorter timescales." The collaboration proved beneficial for both sides. Humanity and other young species provided the Dreamers with fresh perspectives and innovative approaches to cosmic challenges, while the Dreamers shared technologies and insights that advanced mortal civilizations by millions of years of development. 1 year after the crisis, Elena stood in the same observation chamber where she had first encountered Kethvar's warning, but everything had changed. The archaeological site had been expanded into a major research center, where scientists from dozens of species worked together to understand the deep history of the galaxy. The obsidian monolith that had started it all was now the centerpiece of a museum dedicated to the importance of heeding warnings and learning from the mistakes of previous civilizations. "Elena," Chen called from his new laboratory, where he was working on translating communications from a species of living crystalline beings discovered in the Andromeda galaxy, "you need to see this." She joined him at his workstation, where complex mathematical formulas scrolled across holographic displays. But these weren't just equations. They were alive, moving and evolving as they processed information. "Remember how the Eternal Dominion said they had conquered 17 galaxies?" Chen asked. "I've been analyzing their historical records, and I think we misunderstood what that meant." "How so?" "They didn't conquer 17 different galaxies in sequence. They conquered the same galaxy 17 times, across 17 different timelines. Each time they awakened, they immediately began conquering all possible versions of reality simultaneously." Elena felt a chill of understanding. "You're saying that in other timelines they succeeded completely? That there are versions of reality where every conscious being in the galaxy was absorbed into their collective?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. And Elena, some of those timelines are starting to reconnect with ours. The restoration of the Dreamers has created bridges between realities, and we're getting contact attempts from versions of ourselves that never escaped the Dominion's control." The implications were staggering. In some timelines, Admiral Mitchell had never received the warning. In others, Kethvar's sacrifice had failed, or the Dreamers had been too deeply asleep to awaken. In those realities, the Eternal Dominion had achieved their goal of perfect order through absolute control. "What do they want?" Elena asked. "Help," Chen replied simply. "The versions of us that are still trapped in the Dominion's collective consciousness are asking for rescue. They want to know if the techniques we used to restore individual awareness in our timeline can be adapted to work across dimensional boundaries. Elena stared at the data, understanding that their victory was far from complete. They had saved their own galaxy, their own timeline, but countless alternate versions of everyone they knew were still trapped in crystalline prisons, their individual consciousness dissolved into alien collective will. Can it be done? The Dreamers think so. But it would require something unprecedented. A coordinated effort, not just across multiple galaxies, but across multiple realities simultaneously. We'd essentially be declaring war on tyranny throughout the entire multiverse. Elena thought about the magnitude of what Chen was suggesting. They had barely survived freeing one timeline from the Eternal Dominion's control. Now they were being asked to consider liberating infinite versions of reality from cosmic oppression. But wasn't that exactly what the experience had taught them? That the most important battles were the ones that seemed impossible? That the greatest victories came from refusing to accept that any conscious being should be condemned to eternal servitude? Set up a meeting with the voice keepers from the other species, she said finally. If we're going to attempt multiversal liberation, we're going to need every ally we can find. Elena, Chen said quietly, there's something else. The alternate versions of you that are trying to make contact, they're not all asking for rescue. Some of them are warning us about something else entirely. What kind of warning? They're saying that the Eternal Dominion wasn't the only cosmic entity that was imprisoned in ancient times. There were others, beings that make the Dominion look benevolent by comparison. And our actions in waking the Dreamers may have weakened the barriers that keep those entities contained. Elena felt the familiar weight of cosmic responsibility settling on her shoulders once again. They had solved one crisis only to discover that it was part of a much larger pattern of ancient powers and primordial conflicts that stretched across the entire multiverse. Do we know what these other entities are like? The alternate versions of you are calling them the Silence Makers, Chen replied grimly. Apparently, where the Eternal Dominion wanted to absorb all consciousness into their collective, the Silence Makers want to eliminate consciousness entirely. They believe that awareness itself is a flaw in the universe that needs to be corrected. Elena stared out at the stars, thinking about the choice that lay before them. They could focus on consolidating their victory, building their new cosmic civilization, and enjoying the peace they had earned through such terrible sacrifice. Or they could accept that their role as guardians of consciousness was just beginning, that every thinking being in every possible reality was depending on them to stand against forces that sought to end the very possibility of thought, dream, and hope. It wasn't really a choice at all. Contact the Dreamers, she said. Tell them we need to discuss multiversal security protocols. And Chen? Yes, start working on methods for rapid communication across dimensional boundaries. If we're going to coordinate a resistance movement throughout the multiverse, we're going to need better ways to stay in touch with our allies. As Elena prepared for what would undoubtedly be the greatest challenge any species had ever faced, she thought about Admiral Mitchell and the choice that had started it all. The Imperial fleet had awakened the sleeping fleet because they couldn't resist the temptation to claim power they didn't understand. Now Elena and her allies were about to make a different choice, to accept responsibility for protecting consciousness throughout all possible realities, even though they were still learning what that responsibility would require of them. The ancient aliens had warned, never wake the sleeping fleet. The Empire hadn't listened, and the galaxy had paid a terrible price. But from that price had emerged something unprecedented. A coalition of mortal and immortal beings dedicated to ensuring that no conscious entity would ever again face cosmic oppression alone. The Silence Makers were coming, and they brought with them the promise of a universe empty of thought, dream, and hope. But they would find that consciousness, once awakened to its own power and potential, was far more resilient and resourceful than they had ever imagined. The real battle for the soul of the multiverse was just beginning. As Elena prepared for what would undoubtedly be the greatest challenge any species had ever faced, she thought about Admiral Mitchell and the choice that had started it all. The Imperial fleet had awakened the sleeping fleet because they couldn't resist the temptation to claim power they didn't understand. Now Elena and her allies were about to make a different choice, to accept responsibility for protecting consciousness throughout all possible realities, even though they were still learning what that responsibility would require of them. The ancient aliens had warned, never wake the sleeping fleet. The Empire hadn't listened, and the galaxy had paid a terrible price. But from that price had emerged something unprecedented. A coalition of mortal and immortal beings dedicated to ensuring that no conscious entity would ever again face cosmic oppression alone. Elena looked out at the stars one final time, knowing that somewhere in the vast multiverse, the Silence Makers were stirring, but she also knew that consciousness, once awakened to its own power and united in purpose, could face any threat the universe might offer. The warning had been ignored. The fleet had awakened. The galaxy had been saved. Me. And now the real work could begin. End.